So how did I start playing RPGs? I used to play a lot of board games. My wife and I love board games. We started to really, really like collaborative type of games or games, cooperative games where everybody at the table could win. And it was always kind of in the back of our minds, like, oh, we should try D&D. We should try D&D. But D&D is a tricky thing to start to play. Unless you just so happen to be lucky enough to have friends that play, it's a bit of a project to try to figure out how to get started. I think the last kind of game that we got into that sort of pushed us over the edge was we played a lot of Mansions of Madness, which I'll have to pull some of that stuff because it's a very sort of like visual heavy game. The rules are really intricate. We played it back when in the first edition. The second edition introduced some app management stuff, which made it a little bit easier and not as cumbersome. But we really, really enjoyed that. And again, it's basically, a Lovecraftian sort of one shot with a lot of rules, a lot of complexity. And so after playing that for a while and still being curious about D&D, I started watching a little bit more. I think the things that really helped me were Matt Mercer's solo session that he ran for Stephen Colbert, I think for Red Nose Day. I would highly recommend that on YouTube. It's only like an hour, if that.
As it blasts outward, you actually shake the flesh off of its bones. It scatters into a large spray of dark ichor and bone, and you lead to this little skull of this panther kind of scraped to the ground and rolled to the base of your foot, kind of destroyed.
I haven't heard the word ichor in almost 30 years.
Welcome back.
Okay.
Really cool. Obviously, I started watching Critical Role, and I think probably within 10 or so episodes of watching that, I was like, okay, I think I can figure this out. And I ran a year-long solo campaign, solo or duet, I guess. So I was the DM, my wife was the player, and she also had sort of a companion friend that I would sort of NPC, but she could use that character in combat. So I think that's a fairly common like duet configuration. So we did that to learn and also really screw up how to play D&D for about a year.
The first campaign I ever ran was a solo campaign. One of the mistakes I made was the first time she said she wanted to run away from a fight. It was in a cemetery. The villain was a big guy, 2 wolves on leashes, moving at her fast. I said, you can't run away. You can't do that. That's not fun.
And then that sort of story came to a stopping point. And from there, I was like, okay, I want to do a full group now. Kind of have a handle on it, and I've got some ideas, and so I mapped out a campaign idea set in Waterdeep because I thought that was a really cool city. To be clear, I don't have a lot of history, like I don't know the lore of D&D. I just knew that like this was a cool name for a place, a cool location, and it got me thinking about an idea of like 2 wizards that were sort of behind the scenes at war with each other, and this urban setting, which at the time I had no idea would be really difficult to do, or at least really tricky. And so we recruited some friends and some family and said, yeah, we're going to do D&D. And I think that campaign lasted about 6 or 7 sessions before I kind of was getting the feeling that I was like, okay, you know what, guys, let's take a break. There were just some things about it that I was like, okay, I don't know that everybody's into it, and that makes me not want to be into it. So we took a break. It was the death of that first custom campaign. So I kind of put that on the shelf, mourned that loss, and then decided, okay, well, it's nobody's fault, right? Like everybody tried the game. It's not really a board game. It's hard to get into it. Like we were all brand new. So I decided to go to my local Facebook D&D group and basically put out a call for players. I said, I'll make friends with people who already want to play D&D, and that'll be the best way to make a reliable game. So decided at that point to set out, create a whole world. Didn't set it in Waterdeep at that point. Created my own world. Took off. That was 4+ years ago or whatever. Started that first successful group campaign. It's still running now. They're all sort of 15th plus level. In between, start up a second campaign. I run 2 campaigns a week now. Along the way, I've run dozens of one-shots, most of which I've created. Some of those I've talked about on the channel. Some I look forward to unearthing and hopefully sharing. And I still run 2 campaigns a week. That's the schedule anyway. Part of the reason, the number one reason I run 2 campaigns a week is that it's a really good chance that I'm always going to be running some D&D every week, because schedules get in the way all the time. Sometimes it's my schedule, sometimes it's player schedules. Life happens, these things happen. Rather than going multiple weeks without running, 2 a week seems like the good balance where I'm not completely losing my mind. But I also know that every single week I'm going to get to run and keep learning, which I find to be really, really, really important in this hobby. And also something that's really easy to lose track of or to lose touch with when you start making like sort of content in the space. It'd be really easy to just hyper focus on making D&D content and stop running the game, which I think would be sort of really bad for me. I would start to feel really out of touch. Then I will see one of your one shots. Well, I mean, that's the goal. I've never put any footage of me running, because I've basically, all of the games that I run are with friends that weren't, they just weren't games that were set up to ever be online. I only really started posting about D&D about 1.5 years ago, or almost 2 years ago now. But I do have ideas for getting gameplay online in other ways. We shall see. So I knew that what interested me about D&D, once I sort of like, the duet campaign that I ran for 1 year was with the Essential kit. That's what we started with, and we only lasted a few sessions kind of on the path that it charts, and then we sort of spun off, and I ended up making kind of my own thing. Waterdeep was my own thing, and then once I started the homebrew game, like, I wasn't at that point referencing any materials. I didn't need anything external, and the rhythm that I found, that was the rhythm that I decided I needed to get into running weekly, was I need to be able to do what I need to do, because I don't plan weeks of game. I plan basically a session or 2 at a time, with the caveat that sometimes I am creating like a dungeon that could last a couple of weeks, right? Or I'm creating a scenario, and sometimes those take extra time. But in general, I'm about a session ahead. Like, I just finished the session this past Tuesday night, and the room of the dungeon they went into, it was in the midst of combat, and it became like a hostage situation. And we'll pick that up on Tuesday. I still don't know what that's going to exactly entail. I haven't planned anything yet for it. But I knew that I wanted to be creating something brand new every week. That's the rhythm. That's the comfort. That's the speed that I wanted to develop, and then adding a second. At one point, I skipped it over in the middle there, but there was an urban game that was my 3rd weekly game. I think it was running every other week, actually. But there was a 3rd game in the mix there, because I wanted to push. I wanted to see just what I could be, doing. 2's a lot more comfortable, especially now that I do a bunch of stuff. Crafting, I don't sort of hold myself to, crafting doesn't have to get done for a game. If it gets done, great. If not, it sits on the shelf. I'll finish it someday. But the key, like, for me, what I really enjoy when I look at like my notes, my campaign notes, and think about the process of running homebrew games and what I love so much about D&D. You know, I have hundreds of game sessions across multiple campaigns, and no two have ever been the same. I don't even think I've ever really, like, I mean, there's definitely been certain ideas that crossed over from one campaign to the other, but not directly. It was always like, okay, like it was really fun to do, like, what's the best example? You know, having the idea of a witch trying to sort of tempt a member of the party for some sort of a deal. Like, I definitely used that in both campaigns, but they were in wildly different ways, you know, a year or two apart from each other, and I tried them in very different ways. So I really, really like the it's kind of like what's the story about, like, the artist in the woods, in a cabin in the woods, that like paints a painting in the morning and then sets it on fire at night. Like, there's something about the nature of creating something for 4 or 5 people that is only ever relevant or special to that group of people, and then it's sort of gone. And then it's like, okay, put that into the stack of notes and on to the next, like, what's the next session that is going to be unique for that next group.